Hello, I'm Linda Kass and the author of Bessie. My novel is a portrait of the early life of Bess Meyerson, the daughter of poor Russian immigrants living in the Bronx, who was crowned Miss America in 1945 when hostility against the Jewish people was high. In her lifetime, Meyerson became known for extraordinary achievements, unusual for a woman in mid 20th century America.
What inspired you to write this book?
In early 2020, I came across an article about Bess Meyerson that mentioned her winning the Miss America title, something to which I was well aware. I've known about Bess Meyerson most of my adult life. She was an iconic figure and in the public eye, probably the most famous of the long list of women crowned Miss America because of the many things she did since winning the title. She became known in the early years of television, featured on popular talk and game shows. I remember her as a panelist on the weekly primetime show I've Got a Secret. Then she became one of the most powerful women in New York City politics, even unsuccessfully running for the U.S. Senate. I was especially aware of her work as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, a position she held under Mayor Ed Koch in the 1980s when I lived in New York City. And she continued to be an outspoken voice of support for the Anti-Defamation League against hate and social injustice. She was always tagged as the first and only Jewish woman to win the Miss America title. But what really hit me, stamped on the page of the article I read, was the date. September 8th, 1945, a date that hadn't had a place in my memory over the years, but stopped me the moment I read it because I knew how unlikely her win had to have been. My first two novels were set during World War II, so I was well aware that the date I encountered by chance was 6 days after the official end of World War II. It was just weeks after bombs hit Japan during months when the horror of the Holocaust was seeping into news stories. It was a time when anti-Semitism, racism, and sexism were ubiquitous. The war pushed much of that behind the scenes, but it was still very potent. The parallels to what we are seeing today made Bess Meyerson's early story extremely relevant. The significance of naming a Jewish woman like Bess Meyerson to this visible title at that time inspired me to learn more about the events leading to this moment. After reading several biographies about her life, I found that her upbringing was at direct odds with the beauty queen image the world has of her today. She grew up in the Bronx, her parents, Russian immigrants. At 12, she was nearly 6 feet tall and mocked for her height. She was a piano prodigy and at one point dreamed of being a composer. Her blossoming beauty was a quality with little value to her, having been conditioned to only consider scholarship and talent as success. Yet, she's entered in the pageant, and despite the forces against her, she succeeds for her talent and brains, and then achieves notoriety for her voice against racism and hate. I found all of that quite inspiring.
What kind of research did you do while writing this book?
At the beginning of my process, I have many ideas percolating in my head. With Bessie, I needed several sources for the facts, the chronology, and circumstantial details surrounding Bess Meyerson's childhood and her rise to become Miss America. In reading about her life, I became focused on the years from 1936, when she was 12, to 1946, the year of her reign. So, most helpful was a 1987 biography by Susan Dworkin titled Miss America 1945, Bess Meyerson and the Year That Changed Our Lives. I read two other unauthorized biographies, both released a few years later. They included much of her early years and corroborated that, but focused more on later controversies of her adult life. Enormously helpful for my understanding of New York City during the war years and other details of history was Victory City, A History of New York and the New Yorkers During World War II by John Strassboff. And just as I began my quest, I was fortunate to come across Margot Mifflin's 2020 book, Looking for Miss America, a pageant's 100-year quest to define womanhood. That book provided insight into the historic elements of this beauty contest. Now, young Bessie attended the famous High School of Music and Art, so I was thrilled to discover an entire book published in 1964 about the genesis of the school, written by its first principal, Benjamin Steigman. And similarly, I found a book to help me capture Bess's college years at Hunter College. Corroborating much of my research was a wonderful October 1949 article in the New Yorker by Lillian Ross called Here She Comes, Miss America 1949, along with the other articles written through the decades up until Meyerson's death in 2014. And finally, I'm really appreciative to the Anti-Defamation League for providing me with archival material, including ADL bulletins from 1946 and its 1946 annual report, which was great background about Bess Meyerson's role as the voice for ADL's Brotherhood campaign during her reign as Miss America.
Why did you decide to write a novel about Bess Meyerson instead of a biography?
Great question. Biographies already exist, and my desire was to reveal a living, breathing human being, which fiction is able to achieve. My first two novels were also inspired by real people and events. Historical fiction allows imagination and invention while remaining true to the time and to the character herself or himself. I believe a depth of characterization can be gleaned from a fictional portrait of a real person when a writer inhabits that character's thoughts and feelings. It's a fuller, more humane examination of character than a conventional biography because it can bring fresh and engaging and nuanced insights to historical events while remaining faithful to the facts. Books that come to mind include The Last Station, a novel of Tolstoy's final year by Jay Perini, and The Magician by Colm Tobin about the German writer Thomas Mann. I love reading biographical novels, as I call them, and I loved getting to know a real dramatic character like Bess Meyerson by inhabiting her in the writing of this fictional portrait.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
Well, like I said earlier, a lot goes on in my head. My writing process really begins as a vague idea, and I spend a good deal of time just thinking about the story and the characters. With all of my novels thus far, I've begun with a real person living at a particular time period. I like to have a starting point and some sense of where I might end up. It might just be a beginning and ending image. I usually spend several months researching the truths that inspire the telling, as well as those necessary historic facts that set the story in time. I'm also one of those writers with another job. I own a bookstore and I personally curate our very robust author program. So I'm carving out hours from each day in order to write. When I'm fully in the writing mode, I'll block several hours of my day for writing, usually 4 or 5 days each week, as if it were an appointment on my calendar so that nothing interferes with that intention. But I'm always thinking about the story, and I keep pen and paper nearby to jot down ideas wherever I am.
What are a couple books you read during the pandemic that you really loved?
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was reading the Bess Meyerson biographies because it was about, I remember I started on this book in February of 2020. But I was also able to fit in a few others. American Dirt, which is a great book, probably was not the best choice at that moment, given that's a story about someone running for her life on a treacherous journey away from something terribly frightening. I also read The Paris Hours by Alex George, and that was very wonderful to read at that time. It was a moving story of human connection set in the City of Lights on a single day in 1927. And I also really enjoyed Curtis Sittenfeld's Rodham, a novel that imagines a deeply compelling what if Hillary Rodham hadn't married Bill Clinton.
Is there anything else you want us to know about your book?
Well, I think it's important to emphasize that in the 1930s and 40s, American hostility against the Jewish people was high. By mid 1945, Hitler was dead, the Nazis were defeated, yet what existed Still, anti Semitism, racism, sexist propaganda, they were all out there spreading hatred and distrust. I'd say that sounds awfully and sadly familiar to the current moment. Along with anti Semitism, violence is high at this time and it's targeting all minorities, including people of color and women. So there is a connection between Bess Meyerson's world and our own, even though they're separated by more than 8 decades. I hope audiences see in Bessie a young girl thirsting to go beyond her beauty and talent, to find purpose and to make a difference in her world. As a young woman, Bess Meyerson used her gifts to act and help others as a voice for the ADL's Brotherhood campaign to fight hate. Through its blending of fact and fiction, and through the context of this unique moment in American history, Bessie might remind us to always use our voices against hate.
Can you read us a short passage from your book?
I'd love to read a passage from the book. I am going to read from the scene when Bess meets Miss America pageant director Lenora Slaughter when she's competing in the Miss New York City contest. Lenora wears a flashy orange silk dress and bright red lipstick. She speaks fast with self-assurance. I intend to make the pageant the first major national event of the peacetime era. Lenora leans even closer to Bessie, a musk scent overpowering, her voice barely a whisper. She reminds Bessie that the winner will receive a $5,000 scholarship. There is a very strong possibility you might become Miss New York City tonight, and then you'll have a good shot at being Miss America and winning that scholarship. If that happens, what would you like to do? Bessie's heartbeat quickens as she tries to process the full meaning of Lenora's words. She wonders if this forceful woman gives the same message to each finalist as a test. What's the right answer here? I would continue studying piano, buy a new instrument, maybe a baby grand. I could start a music school. I could even go to graduate school. I wanted to go to college more than anything in the world, but I didn't have the money. Lenora edges back in her seat. This scholarship gives you girls options. I had to fight the board to make this happen, had to raise the money to fund it. Bessie listens intently, sizing up this woman before her. How did you go about that? Raising money, that is. Just convincing businesses there's a value to exposure. Carolina swimsuits, for example. Now, their suits will be Miss America's crowning uniform. Lenora shares that the handwritten letters to 230 companies who sold products a beauty queen might endorse. I even recruited the executive director of the Association of American Colleges and Universities to head our new scholarship program. Bessie considers what she's just heard. Lenora Slaughter is a bright woman who knows exactly what she wants and gets things done, and she's succeeding in a man's world. Bessie wonders what Lenora has given up, achieving all that she has. I hope that I can attain in music what you've been able to accomplish in your field. That scholarship money is why I'm here. Yes, but you've got to be flexible, Bess. What if music doesn't work out for you? You might also decide to go into show business or the movies. Many girls do. Lenora smiles, exposing her big white teeth. Several seconds of silence pass as she seems to consider her next words. And you need to think about all the things that could get in your way if you consider that path. For an instant, Lenora turns away, and Bessie thinks their conversation is over, until the pageant director suddenly blurts, Bess Meyerson is just not a very attractive name for a career in show business. I really have no intention of going into show business. Bessie feels her face get hot. Well, even for this competition, changing it couldn't hurt. Bessie knows it's an ordinary thing to do. People with ethnic names change them. Lauren Bacall was born Betty Persky. Cary Grant was Archie Leach. Kirk Douglas understandably changed his name from Iser Danielnovich. What would you suggest? Lenora doesn't reply immediately. Maybe Betty Merrick or something like that. Bessie eases back in her seat, and then something hits her like a gut punch. Papa, having survived a pogrom as a child in Russia, told her to remember who she was. He meant being a Jew. Bessie senses something leaking from Lenore's deliberate affect, something deeper than the desire for a name change. She realizes suddenly that she's dealing with Lenore's own bigotry, her attitude about having a Jewish contestant and potentially a Jewish winner. Bessie clears her throat, tightens the white scarf around her head. No, I'm not going to change my name. Lenore's face tenses, her brows tighten. If I win this contest tonight, the only people who will really care are my family and the families I've grown up with, my friends from Hunter and from high school, my campers. And if I win and my name is Betty Merrick, they won't know it's me. I want them to know it's me. So I think I have to keep my own name. I am Bess Meyerson. I want to thank Boulder Bookstore for giving me this opportunity. I hope you read Bessie, on sale September 12th, and that you share my affection for this consequential woman. Thank you.